The overhead bins rattled first. A sharp, metallic shudder that made passengers glance up from their screens, half concerned, half annoyed. Then came the scream. It tore through the cabin of Coastal Air Flight 918 like a blade through silk. High-pitched, primal, the kind of sound that turns blood cold and makes strangers lock eyes in shared terror. Row 3A, first class. A woman in cream linen convulsed against her seat, limbs jerking in violent, unnatural rhythms. Her champagne flute shattered against the armrest, golden liquid spraying across Italian leather. Medical emergency. We need a doctor now. The flight attendant's voice cracked as she lunged forward, fumbling with the oxygen mask that dangled uselessly above the seizing passenger. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't secure the elastic band. A man in his 50s vaulted over the center console, his polo shirt identifying him as Dr. Alan Reese, Emergency Medicine, Baptist Health. He dropped to his knees beside the woman, fingers pressing against her neck, searching for a pulse that hammered erratically beneath papery skin. She's tachycardic. Pulse is thready. Someone get me the medical kit. Fast. His command cut through the mounting chaos. Another physician appeared, a slender woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight. Dr. Monika Feld. She carried herself with surgical precision as she squeezed into the narrow space. The woman on the seat, later identified as Lenora Vance, founder and CEO of Vancewell Therapeutics, worth an estimated $2.3 billion, was dying. Her pupils had blown wide, swallowing the gray of her irises. Foam gathered at the corners of her lips. Her designer blouse was soaked through with sweat. Possible stroke, Dr. Reese muttered, reaching for her eyelids. Or aneurysm. We need to stabilize her airway and... You're treating the wrong problem. The voice was small, clear, certain. Every head in first class swiveled toward the back of the cabin. There, standing barefoot in the aisle between rows 12 and 13, was a child. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, swimming in an oversized gray hoodie that hung past her knuckles. Dark hair fell in uncombed waves around a pale, serious face. She held a battered notebook against her chest like a shield. The lead flight attendant, Cassandra Bly, appeared behind the girl with the swift, predatory movement of someone who had spent 23 years enforcing order at 38,000 feet. Her uniform was immaculate. Her expression was ice. Whose child is this? Cassandra's voice could have frosted glass. Who is responsible for this passenger? No one answered. The girl stood motionless, staring past Cassandra, past Dr. Reese, directly at the seizing woman in 3A. Her brown eyes tracked the irregular spasms, the way Lenora's right hand curled inward, the slight bluish tint creeping into her nail beds. "Ma'am, you need to sit down immediately," Cassandra said, placing a firm hand on the child's shoulder. "This is a restricted area. You are interfering with emergency medical care." The girl didn't move, didn't even blink. "It's not a stroke," she said quietly, "and it's not an aneurysm. If you give her what you're reaching for, you're going to stop her heart." Before we continue, let me ask you a quick question. How many times has your ignorance to a child's voice during a critical moment affected you? Tell us where in the world you are watching from, because we'd love to know how far our stories travel. And hit that subscribe button if we've gotten your attention so far. Now let's continue. Dr. Reese had frozen, his hand halfway to the medical kit where preloaded syringes of emergency medications waited in neat plastic rows. He stared at the child with an expression caught between confusion and irritation. "Sweetheart, this is very serious. The adults need to handle this. Okay?" His tone was gentle but dismissive, the way one might redirect a toddler who had wandered into traffic. "I know it's serious." The girl's voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around the notebook. "That's why you need to listen. She has acute cinchona-derived quinine toxicity compounded by a drug interaction. Her electrolytes are crashing. If you administer a standard benzodiazepine without correcting the underlying ion imbalance, You'll trigger a fatal arrhythmia. Silence descended like a dropped curtain. Dr. Feld straightened slowly, her eyes narrowing. What did you just say? Before the girl could respond, Cassandra's grip tightened. That is enough. You will return to your seat this instant, or I will have you restrained for the safety of this aircraft and its passengers. The girl's gaze finally broke from Lenora and landed on Cassandra. There was no defiance in her expression. No anger. Just a bone-deep weariness that seemed far too ancient for her face. Please, she whispered. Just look at her pupils. Look at the tremor pattern. Check her bag for supplements. I'm not making this up. Security, Cassandra said into her radio, her voice sharp and final. We have a non-compliant minor in the main cabin, requesting immediate assistance. And just like that, the child who might have saved a life became the problem. But to understand how a 10-year-old girl ended up restrained in the jump seat of a Boeing 787 while a billionaire pharmaceutical executive died 3 rows away, you have to rewind. 24 minutes earlier, to when everything still seemed fine. Miami International Airport gleamed in the late afternoon sun, all glass and steel and the kind of manufactured calm that comes from excellent air conditioning and abundant gateside sushi. Coastal Air Flight 918 was already boarding, its jetway packed with the usual assortment of travelers. Business executives scrolling through emails, families negotiating luggage, college students with neck pillows and noise-canceling optimism. Lenora Vance did not wait in lines. She emerged from the Centurion Lounge with the fluid grace of someone for whom obstacles simply evaporated. 2 assistants flanked her, one carrying her Bottega Veneta carry-on, the other reviewing a tablet filled with meeting notes and stock projections. Lenora herself carried nothing but a small leather clutch and an aura of absolute authority. At 62, she had the kind of face that cosmetic dermatology and generational wealth could sculpt into timelessness. Her silver hair was cut in a precise bob. Her navy suit probably cost more than most passengers' monthly rent. She moved through the world as if it had been constructed specifically for her convenience. And largely it had been. Ms. Vance, your seat is ready. We've ensured the cabin temperature is set to your preference. The gate agent's smile was professional and slightly nervous. Is there anything else we can provide before departure? Just silence, Lenora replied without breaking stride. I have work to do. She swept onto the aircraft, accepting a glass of champagne she didn't ask for from a flight attendant she didn't acknowledge. Her seat in 3A was already configured exactly as she preferred. Lumbar support adjusted, reading light angled, privacy screen extended. She settled in with the practiced ease of someone who flew first class the way ordinary people took buses. 43 rows behind her, Rowan Hale struggled with an overhead bin that refused to cooperate. The bin was overstuffed with someone else's rollaboard, leaving no space for her small canvas backpack. She stood on tiptoes, trying to wedge it into a gap that clearly didn't exist, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment as passengers stacked up behind her in the aisle. Excuse me, sweetheart, but you need to keep moving. A businessman in a wrinkled button-down squeezed past her with exaggerated impatience. Some of us have connections. Rowan mumbled an apology and clutched the backpack to her chest instead, sliding into seat 29B with her head down. The middle seat. Always the middle seat. She was small enough that her feet barely touched the floor, sneakers dangling a few inches above the stained carpet that had seen 1,000 flights before this one. She wore jeans with a hole in one knee, not the fashionable kind but the worn-through kind that spoke of playgrounds and scraped falls. The gray hoodie was 3 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up multiple times to free her hands. On the front, faded letters spelled out, University of Washington Pharmacology Department. A relic from a life that felt like ancient history. The woman in the window seat glanced at her, then at the empty aisle seat, then back at Rowan with barely concealed disappointment. Solo child traveler in the middle seat meant she wouldn't be able to sprawl out for a nap. The woman sighed, inserted earbuds, and turned her face toward the oval window. Rowan didn't mind being ignored. She preferred it, actually. Being noticed meant questions. Questions meant explanations. Explanations meant the look. That particular expression adults got when they learned she was flying alone from Miami to Tacoma to stay with an aunt she'd met exactly twice. The mixture of pity and discomfort that made her feel like a problem that needed solving. She pulled the notebook from her backpack and opened it to a page covered in dense, meticulous handwriting. Chemical formulas.
Interaktion charts.
Margin notes in different colored inks. The notebook was falling apart. Its spine cracked, pages threatening to escape from the wire binding. But every inch was filled with her mother's handwriting, and that made it more valuable than anything in Lenora Vance's leather clutch 43 rows ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been cleared for departure and are currently number 4 for takeoff. Flight time to Seattle will be approximately 5 hours and 42 minutes. We're expecting smooth conditions most of the way, so sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight on coastal air. The engines hummed to life. Rowan pressed her palm against the notebook and closed her eyes as the aircraft began its taxi. She'd flown this route once before 6 months ago, going the opposite direction. Back when her mother was still alive. Back when there were still appointments to keep and clinical trials to hope for and reasons to believe that knowledge mattered more than luck. Now the notebook was all she had left. 6 years of research. Hundreds of pages documenting drug interactions that the major pharmaceutical companies had deemed too niche, too complicated, too unprofitable to pursue. Her mother, Dr. Elise Hale, had been brilliant and stubborn and convinced that understanding the hidden dangers in supplement prescription combinations could save thousands of lives. She'd been wrong about one thing, though. Knowledge didn't save anyone if nobody listened. The plane lifted off smoothly, Miami shrinking to Toy Town proportions beneath them. Rowan kept the notebook open on the tray table, reading passages she'd already memorized, tracing her mother's handwriting with one finger like a talisman against forgetting. In first class, Lenora accepted a warm towel and declined the pre-departure beverage service. She had contracts to review, a merger to finalize, a board meeting to prepare for. Her personal physician, Dr. Raymond Oakes, had advised against this trip. She'd been experiencing headaches lately, tension probably, stress, the natural consequence of running a pharmaceutical empire while male competitors circled like sharks, waiting for her to show weakness. She'd dismissed his concerns with the same efficiency she dismissed most inconveniences. A headache was not a reason to delay a $40 million acquisition. She'd taken her usual supplements that morning. The herbal blend her naturopath had formulated specifically for cognitive enhancement and stress relief. All natural, organic, expensive enough to be trustworthy. The first twinge hit as they reached cruising altitude. Not painful exactly, more like a tightness behind her left eye, as if someone had tightened a screw one rotation too far. Lenora pressed 2 fingers against her temple and breathed slowly through her nose. This was nothing. She'd given presentations with migraines, closed deals while fighting off the flu. A minor headache wouldn't derail her afternoon. She opened her laptop and tried to focus on the contract language swimming across the screen. The words seemed slightly blurred at the edges, letters refusing to hold their shapes. Lenora blinked hard, attributing it to the cabin pressure or the recycled air or simple fatigue. "Can I get you anything, Ms. Vance?" The flight attendant appeared with practiced concern. Young woman, early 30s, name tag reading Jennifer. Water, room temperature, no ice. Lenora's voice came out sharper than intended. The headache was expanding, pressing outward against the inside of her skull like something trying to escape. Jennifer returned with the water in a real glass, not plastic. Lenora drank it in 3 swallows and immediately wanted more but refused to ask. Asking meant admitting something was wrong. Instead, she reached into her clutch and extracted a small pill organizer. Her afternoon supplements. The green capsule for cognitive function. The white one for stress. the pale yellow for circulation. She swallowed all 3 dry and returned to her laptop. 15 rows back, in the peculiar purgatory of premium economy, a man named Jordan Pike was trying to calculate whether his company's new aerospace navigation algorithm could reduce transatlantic flight times by 4.7 or 4.9%. He was the kind of person who found comfort in numbers, who saw the world as a series of problems waiting for elegant solutions. He was also the kind of person who noticed details, like the child in economy who hadn't moved in 45 minutes except to turn pages in a notebook covered with what looked like chemical formulas, or the elegant woman in first class who just swallowed 3 pills without water, which was either impressive or concerning depending on the medication. Jordan had a cousin with epilepsy. He recognized the particular way people moved when they were trying to suppress symptoms they didn't want others to see. But it wasn't his business. He returned to his calculations and tried to ignore the vague unease settling in his gut. In the galley between first class and premium economy, Cassandra Bly conducted her pre-service inspection with military precision. 23 years of flying had taught her that chaos was always one careless moment away. Passengers were fundamentally children who needed rules, boundaries, consequences. The ones who respected authority made her job possible. The ones who didn't made her job necessary. She'd already identified the potential problems on this flight. A family in row 18 with 3 children under 5. A college-age group in the back already drinking. And the unaccompanied minor in 29B who'd been flagged in the system with a note that made Cassandra's jaw tighten. Rowan Hale, age 10, traveling alone. Emergency contact. Patricia Hale, aunt, Tacoma, Washington. Notes. Child may require additional attention. Mother deceased 4 months prior. Cassandra had seen the type before. Kids shuttled between relatives nobody really wanted. Usually withdrawn or acting out, occasionally both. They required watching, extra vigilance. They disrupted the careful equilibrium she worked so hard to maintain. She made a mental note to check on the girl periodically, then turned her attention to beverage service. First class first, always. The passengers who paid premium fares deserved premium treatment. It was hierarchy, and hierarchy was what separated civilization from anarchy. 90 minutes into the flight, Lenora's headache had evolved from annoying to alarming. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed her laptop, unable to focus on words that now seemed to vibrate on the screen. The tightness behind her I had spread to encompass her entire head, a squeezing pressure that made her teeth ache. Worse, her heart was racing, not the elevated pulse of stress or caffeine, but a fluttering, irregular rhythm that felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. She pressed the call button. Jennifer appeared within seconds. "Yes, Ms. Vance. I need—" Lenora paused, struggling to find words that had always come effortlessly. "I need aspirin, or ibuprofen, something for a headache." "Of course, I'll bring that right away." But when Jennifer returned with the small packet of tablets and a fresh glass of water, Lenora's hand shook so badly she dropped the pills. They scattered across the leather seat, tiny white circles against navy cushions. "Ms. Vance? Are you all right?" Jennifer's professional concern shifted to genuine alarm. "You look very pale." "I'm fine." Lenora bent to retrieve the pills and the world tilted sideways. The cabin seemed to rotate around an axis that shouldn't exist. She gripped the armrest, knuckles whitening, willing reality to stabilize. Didn't. Her vision began to narrow, darkness creeping in from the periphery like a slow-motion eclipse. The last thing she heard before the seizure took her was her own voice, distant and strange, saying words she didn't recognize. Then the screaming started. In seat 29B, Rowan's head snapped up at the first scream. The sound cut through the ambient hum of engines and conversation like an alarm bell designed specifically for her nervous system. She knew that sound, had heard variations of it in hospital corridors and emergency rooms, and one terrible night in a small apartment in Miami when she'd woken to find her mother collapsed on the bathroom floor. The notebook slid from her lap as she stood, instinct overriding the rules about staying seated during flight. The man in the aisle seat grabbed her arm reflexively. "Whoa, kid, sit down. Turbulence or something." But Rowan was already pulling free, her small frame surprisingly strong with urgency. She could see heads turning toward first class, could hear the sharp commands of crew members mobilizing. "Medical emergency." The words crackled through the cabin like electricity. She moved down the aisle, weaving between passengers who'd stood to gawk, drawn toward the crisis with the inevitability of gravity. A flight attendant she didn't recognize rushed past carrying a red medical kit, nearly knocking her sideways. Rowan steadied herself against a seat back and kept moving. "Excuse me. Coming through. Please move." Her voice was too small to carry authority, but desperation gave it an edge that made people shift aside without thinking. She reached the boundary between economy and premium economy, just as Cassandra Bly materialized like a wall made of pressed uniform and rigid disapproval. "Stop right there." Cassandra's hand came up in a gesture that was half traffic cop, half prison guard. "This area is restricted during an emergency. Return to your seat immediately. Someone's sick." Rowan tried to peer around Cassandra's shoulder, but the woman shifted to block her view. "I can help. Please, I just need to see." "You need to sit down." Cassandra's voice dropped to a tone that allowed no argument. "This is not a request. This is a safety regulation. Passengers must remain seated during medical emergencies." "But I know about." "I don't care what you think you know." Cassandra placed both hands on Rowan's shoulders and physically turned her around. "You are a child. There are licensed medical professionals handling the situation. Your job is to stay out of the way." Rowan felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, the frustration of being dismissed before she'd even been heard. It was the same feeling she'd had in hospital waiting rooms when doctors had spoken over her head to social workers about the minor, as if she were furniture. The same feeling when her mother's colleagues had patted her head and told her to run along, while the grown-ups talked about research that Rowan had helped compile. "Please," she tried again, hating the tremor in her voice. "Just let me look. I won't touch anything. I won't get in the way. I just need to see the patient's symptoms." Cassandra's expression hardened into something carved from ice and institutional authority. "If you do not return to your seat in the next 5 seconds, I will have you physically escorted and restrained for the remainder of this flight. Do you understand me?" Rowan understood. She understood that the person dying in first class was about to receive the wrong treatment because the people in charge would rather trust credentials than listen to a child. She understood that her mother had been right about the world being full of locked doors that knowledge alone couldn't open. But she also understood something Cassandra didn't. Sometimes you had to break rules because following them would cost someone their life. "I understand," Rowan said quietly, and walked back to her seat. Cassandra watched her go with grim satisfaction, then turned back toward first class where controlled chaos was rapidly becoming uncontrolled. Dr. Reese had Lenora on her side in the recovery position, one hand supporting her head, while Dr. Feld checked vital signs with equipment from the medical kit. A third physician had appeared, Dr. Stephen Kwan, a cardiologist from Denver who'd been dozing in 7C when the commotion started. Lenora's seizure had subsided into irregular tremors, her body jerking in unpredictable spasms that made examination difficult. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint. Respirations were shallow and rapid. Pulse was threading, weak, and fast simultaneously. "Oxygen saturation is dropping," Dr. Feld announced, watching the portable pulse oximeter. "She's at 87% and falling. We need to intubate if this continues." "Pupils are blown and non-reactive," Dr. Reese added, lifting Lenora's eyelids. "Significant anisocoria. Left pupil is significantly larger than the right. This is presenting like a hemorrhagic stroke or acute neurological event." Dr. Kwan listened to her heart with a stethoscope, his frown deepening with each beat. "Rhythm is all over the place. Tachycardic and irregular. Could be atrial fibrillation triggered by the stroke, or the stroke could be secondary to a cardiac event. Either way, we need to stabilize her before she arrests. Jennifer hovered nearby, pale and shaking. What do you need? What can I get? Benzodiazepine for the seizure activity, Dr. Reese said, rifling through the medical kit. We need to stop the convulsions before we can address the underlying cause. And get the captain on the line. We may need an emergency landing. Cassandra appeared in the galley entrance, her face composed but her eyes sharp with the calculation of liability and procedure. Doctors, what's the situation? Do we need to divert? Possibly, Dr. Kwan said without looking up. We have a female passenger, early 60s, presenting with seizure, altered mental status, possible stroke. We're attempting stabilization, but she's deteriorating rapidly. Does anyone know what medications she's on? Medical history. Dr. Feld looked around at the first-class passengers who'd pressed themselves against the walls, giving the medical team space but watching with horrified fascination. One of Lenora's assistants, a young man with designer glasses and the overwhelmed expression of someone watching their job security evaporate, stepped forward hesitantly. She doesn't really share that information. Very private about medical stuff. But I know she takes supplements. Lots of them. Has them specially formulated. Supplements, Dr. Reese repeated, his tone mixing frustration with resignation. That's not particularly helpful. Supplements can be anything from vitamins to heavy metals. We need specifics. Her bag, the assistant said, pointing to the Bottega Veneta carry-on stowed under the seat. She keeps everything in there, organized, color-coded pill case. Dr. Feld retrieved the bag and extracted a leather pill organizer that probably cost more than the medical kit. She opened it to reveal multiple compartments, each containing different capsules and tablets in a rainbow of colors and sizes. This is a pharmacy. Green, white, yellow, orange, red. And these are just for today. Anyone know what any of these are? Silence. The assistant shook his head. She worked with a naturopath. Someone exclusive. I don't know the details. Fantastic, Dr. Reese muttered. He returned to the medical kit and extracted a preloaded syringe of midazolam, a fast-acting benzodiazepine used for seizure control. We're flying blind here, but we can't wait for a full medical history while she seizes. Standard protocol is seizure suppression first, then investigate cause. He drew up the medication, checked the dosage, and prepared to inject. In seat 29B, Rowan watched the overhead bins and counted seconds. She'd given Cassandra exactly what the flight attendant wanted. Compliance, obedience, the appearance of a child who understood her place. She'd returned to her seat, buckled her seatbelt, and sat perfectly still for exactly 90 seconds. Then she'd unbuckled, grabbed her notebook, and slipped into the aisle while the man beside her was craning his neck to see what was happening in first class. This time she moved differently, not rushing forward in obvious defiance, but sliding between seats, using taller passengers as cover, making herself small and invisible. She'd learned this skill in hospitals where children weren't supposed to be in certain wings. Make yourself forgettable. Move with purpose but not urgency. If anyone stops you, apologize and comply immediately. Then try again from a different angle. She made it to premium economy before anyone noticed. Then past the galley while Jennifer was focused on the medical team. Then to the edge of first class where she could finally see. The woman on the floor was gray-faced and trembling. 3 doctors surrounded her, focused and competent and about to make a mistake that would kill her. Rowan saw the syringe in Dr. Reese's hand, saw the clear liquid inside, saw him angle it toward Lenora's shoulder, preparing to inject. She saw the pill organizer open on the seat, saw the distinctive capsules green and white and pale yellow. She saw her mother's handwriting in her mind's eye, a page from the notebook labeled Critical Interactions, Cinchona alkaloids plus benzodiazepines. She saw exactly how this would end if someone didn't intervene. "Stop," Rowan said, her voice cutting through the focused intensity of the medical team. "You're treating the wrong problem." Every head turned toward her. 3 doctors, 2 flight attendants, a dozen first-class passengers, all staring at a small girl in an oversized hoodie who had no right to be there, no authority to speak, no reason to be taken seriously. Dr. Reese's hand didn't move from the syringe, but his expression shifted to confused irritation. "Sweetheart, this is a medical emergency. You need to go back to your seat. If you give her that benzodiazepine, you'll stop her heart," Rowan said, louder this time. Her hands gripped the notebook so hard the wire binding cut into her palms. "She has quinine toxicity. Look at her tremors. Look at the specific pattern. The peripheral tremor combined with central nervous system depression. That's not stroke presentation. That's cinchona alkaloid poisoning." Dr. Feld straightened slightly, her eyes narrowing. "How do you know what medication this is?" "Standard emergency protocol for status seizures," Rowan said, her words tumbling out faster now. "Midazolam or lorazepam, probably midazolam because it's faster acting. But in the presence of quinine derivatives, benzodiazepines cause catastrophic potentiation of cardiotoxic effects. The quinine has already destabilized her sodium and potassium channels. If you add a GABA agonist right now, you'll trigger complete cardiac conduction block." The cabin had gone absolutely silent. Even the passengers who'd been murmuring in worried clusters had stopped talking. The only sounds were the jet engines and Lenora's labored breathing. Dr. Reese lowered the syringe slightly, but his expression remained skeptical. "That's very specific medical knowledge for someone who appears to be about 10 years old. Where exactly did you learn those terms?" "My mother was Dr. Elise Hale, pharmacologist, University of Washington." Rowan's voice cracked slightly on the past tense, but she pushed through. "She spent 6 years documenting dangerous supplement drug interactions that nobody else was tracking. Cinchona bark derivatives marketed as natural leg cramp remedies or anti-inflammatory supplements contain quinine concentrations high enough to cause toxicity when combined with." "Whose child is this?" Cassandra's voice sliced through Rowan's explanation like a guillotine. The flight attendant appeared behind her, fury radiating from every pressed crease of her uniform. "I gave you a direct order to remain seated. You deliberately disobeyed me." "I'm trying to save her life," Rowan said, not taking her eyes off the doctor's. "Please just look at the supplements in her pill case. The yellow capsule. If it's labeled for circulation or muscle health or natural anti-inflammatory, it almost certainly contains cinchona alkaloids. That's what's causing this. You are interfering with medical professionals," Cassandra hissed, gripping Rowan's shoulder hard enough to hurt. "These are actual doctors trying to help this woman. You are a child playing at knowledge you don't possess." Dr. Kwan had picked up the pill organizer and was examining the yellow capsule, turning it over in his palm. "There's no label. No pharmacy marking. These are clearly custom-formulated supplements. Which means no regulation, no standardization, no way to know dosage." Rowan pressed on desperately. "That's the whole problem. People think natural means safe. They think supplements can't hurt them because they're not real medicine. But cinchona bark is where quinine comes from. It's the same active compound, just without quality control or safety oversight. And when you combine it with certain blood pressure medications or diabetes drugs or—" "Enough!" Cassandra yanked Rowan backward, pulling her away from the medical scene. "You will stop this performance immediately." "I'm not performing." Rowan twisted in Cassandra's grip, her notebook falling open to spill pages covered in her mother's meticulous documentation. Chemical structures, case studies, warnings that had been ignored by every pharmaceutical company and medical board they'd submitted to. "My mother tried to publish this research. She tried to warn people. Nobody would listen because the supplement industry is worth billions and they fought every attempt at regulation. People are dying from interactions that could be prevented if anyone would just. Security, this is Bly. Cassandra spoke into her radio while maintaining her iron grip on Rowan's shoulder. I need immediate assistance in first class. Disruptive minor refusing to comply with crew instructions. Possible restraint situation. You're making a mistake, Rowan said, and hated that her eyes were burning with tears she refused to let fall. Please, just test the theory. Check her bag for supplement bottles. Look for anything with cinchona bark, quinine, or natural muscle support. 5 minutes of investigation could save her life. Dr. Reese was watching this exchange with an expression that had shifted from irritation to uncertainty. He still held the syringe, but he hadn't administered it. Monica, what do you think? Is there any validity to this? Dr. Feld studied Rowan with calculating intensity, the kind of look that took in details and assembled them into conclusions. Stained jeans and oversized hoodie but clean skin and clear eyes. Falling apart notebook filled with professional-grade chemical formulas. Vocabulary that didn't match her age. Desperation that didn't match a performance. I think, Dr. Feld said slowly, that it wouldn't hurt to check the supplements before we administer emergency medication to a patient whose medical history we don't know. It would hurt the chain of command, Cassandra interjected sharply. We have qualified physicians making medical decisions. We do not take medical advice from children, regardless of how articulate they are. This sets a dangerous precedent. The dangerous precedent is ignoring information because of who's providing it, Dr. Feld countered. She reached for Lenora's carry-on bag again. Does Ms. Vance have any bottles in here? Supplement containers. The assistant stepped forward again, pulling out a designer toiletry case. Inside were several amber bottles with custom labels, the kind that came from expensive wellness clinics catering to people who could afford personalized medicine. He read the labels aloud. Advanced Cognitive Support Formula. Cardiovascular Circulation Complex. Cellular Anti-Inflammatory Blend. Those are marketing names, not ingredients, Rowan said quickly. Turn the bottle over. Look for the supplement facts panel. It should list active compounds. Dr. Kwan took the cardiovascular circulation complex bottle and squinted at the tiny print. Active ingredients: hawthorn berry extract, garlic powder, ginkgo biloba, and cinchona officinalis bark. 23% standardized alkaloid content. He looked up, his expression shifting. That's actually a fairly high concentration. How much would constitute a toxic dose? Dr. Reese asked. Depends on individual sensitivity and what other medications she's taking, Rowan answered before anyone else could. But symptoms of synchronism include tinnitus, tremors, visual disturbances, altered mental status, and cardiac arrhythmias, which is exactly what she's presenting with. And if she's been taking this daily for weeks or months, she could have significant accumulation in her system. A new voice entered the conversation. The kid might be onto something. Jordan Pike had left his seat in premium economy and approached the group, drawn by a combination of concern and curiosity. I'm not a doctor, but I am a systems analyst. What she's describing follows a logical progression. Input variable of quinine derivative plus intervention variable of benzodiazepine equals catastrophic output. If there's even a chance she's right, shouldn't we verify before proceeding? This is not a democracy, Cassandra said, her voice rising with each word. This is an aircraft in flight with established protocols and clear hierarchies. We do not crowdsource medical decisions based on the speculation of a child and a... She glanced at Jordan dismissively, systems analyst. Actually, Dr. Feld said quietly, in emergency medicine we do exactly that. We gather all available information and adjust our treatment plan accordingly. Pride kills patients. Flexibility saves them. Dr. Reese set down the syringe with careful deliberation. All right, let's approach this systematically. If this is quinine toxicity, what's the correct treatment protocol? Rowan felt Cassandra's grip tighten painfully on her shoulder, but she ignored it and focused on the doctors. First, stop any seizure activity without benzodiazepines. Use phenobarbital if available or consider propofol in small doses. Second, correct the electrolyte imbalances immediately. She'll need aggressive 4 fluids with potassium and magnesium supplementation. Third, cardiac monitoring because the biggest risk is ventricular arrhythmias. And fourth, if you have activated charcoal in the medical kit, administration could help reduce further absorption if she took the supplement recently. Dr. Kwan was already digging through the medical kit. We have limited options here. This isn't a fully stocked emergency department. We've got basic cardiac drugs, some anticonvulsants for supplies, but no propofol and no activated charcoal. Phenobarbital? Rowan asked. Yes, we have that. Used less commonly than benzos for seizures, but it's in here. He extracted another preloaded syringe. What about 4 setup? Dr. Feld asked Jennifer. Can we establish a line? Absolutely. We carry 4 supplies for emergencies. Jennifer was already moving, grateful to have concrete tasks that didn't involve philosophical debates about authority. Cassandra released Rowan abruptly and stepped between her and the doctors. I want it on record that I am formally objecting to this course of action. This passenger is receiving medical treatment based on unverified information from an unqualified minor. If this woman dies or suffers injury as a result of this deviation from standard protocol, the liability will be significant. Noted, Dr. Reese said without looking at her. But Dr. Feld is right. The kid's explanation is internally consistent and the evidence supports the theory. The supplement bottle confirms cinchona bark. The symptoms align. And frankly, I've seen too many unusual presentations in the ER to dismiss a theory just because it comes from an unexpected source. He looked at Rowan directly. What's your name?
Rowan Hale.
Okay, Rowan, we're going to try this your way. But you need to understand that if you're wrong, this woman could die. Are you certain about this? Rowan thought about her mother, about the hundreds of hours spent documenting interactions that pharmaceutical companies deemed irrelevant because they cut into supplement industry profits, about the patients who'd contacted them with stories of unexplained reactions that doctors couldn't diagnose because they never asked about supplements, about the research papers that had been rejected, the grant applications denied, the warnings dismissed. Her mother had been certain. The research was solid. The science was sound. The only thing that had been missing was someone willing to listen. I'm certain, Rowan said. This is cinchona toxicity. My mother documented 47 similar cases over 6 years. The pattern is consistent. If you follow standard seizure protocol with benzodiazepines, Ms. Vance won't survive the next 10 minutes. Dr. Reese held Rowan's gaze for 3 long seconds, searching for doubt or hesitation. He found neither. All right, Monica, let's get that 4 started. Stephen, prep the phenobarbital but smaller dose than standard protocol. If the kid is right about the cardiac instability, we don't want to suppress her system too aggressively. Jennifer, I need you monitoring vitals continuously and calling out any changes immediately. The medical team moved with renewed purpose, their earlier uncertainty replaced by the focused intensity of a revised plan. Dr. Feld knelt beside Lenora and began palpating for a vein in her left arm. The woman's skin was clammy, circulation poor, making the task more difficult than usual. Veins are thready, Dr. Feld muttered. Dehydration or poor perfusion? Possibly both. She slapped lightly at Lenora's inner elbow, trying to raise a suitable vessel. Jennifer, warm compress if you have one. Jennifer appeared with a cloth soaked in hot water from the galley. The warmth brought a vein to the surface, and Dr. Feld inserted the forecatheter with practiced efficiency. We're in. Someone hold this steady while I connect the line. Jordan Pike dropped to his knees without being asked, his engineer's hands steady as he held Lenora's arm motionless. Dr. Kwan connected the 4 tubing and began running saline solution at an aggressive rate. Potassium and magnesium, Rowan reminded them quietly. The quinine disrupts cellular ion gradients. Sodium-potassium pump dysfunction is what's causing the cardiac instability. You need to correct the gradient before the arrhythmia becomes irreversible. We don't have potassium or magnesium in 4 form, Dr. Kwan said, frustration edging into his voice. The medical kit has oral supplements but nothing parenteral. Rowan's mind raced through alternatives. What about the galley? Salt substitutes often contain potassium chloride. Sports drinks have electrolytes. It's not ideal, but if you can dissolve potassium supplement tablets in the 4 bag. That's not sterile, Dr. Feld interrupted. We can't introduce contaminated solutions into an 4 line. Then oral administration, Rowan countered. She's not actively seizing right now. If you can get her conscious enough to swallow, electrolyte replacement drinks would help. Coconut water has high potassium. Orange juice. Even low-sodium vegetable juice. Jennifer was already moving again. We have coconut water in first class.
Premium brands.
Also electrolyte packets for hydration. Bring everything, Dr. Reese ordered. And someone get the captain on the line. We need to know our options for emergency landing. Cassandra, who'd been standing rigid with suppressed fury, finally found her opening. The captain should also be informed that this treatment plan is based on speculation from an unaccompanied minor with no medical credentials, no supervision, and a clear pattern of disruptive behavior. For the record can note whatever you want, Dr. Feld said without looking up. Right now, I'm more concerned with keeping this woman alive than covering institutional liability. Lenora's tremors were subsiding slightly under the influence of 4 fluids, but her cardiac rhythm remained dangerously irregular. Dr. Kwan had his stethoscope pressed to her chest, listening to the chaotic pattern with growing concern. She's in multifocal ventricular ectopy, he announced. Multiple premature beats from different foci. This is a setup for ventricular tachycardia or worse. We need cardiac monitoring equipment. We have a portable AED with monitoring capability, Jennifer said, returning with an armload of coconut water containers and electrolyte packets. It's designed for defibrillation, but it can display rhythm. Get it. Now. Dr. Kwan accepted the coconut water and looked at Lenora's face. Her eyes were moving beneath closed lids, a sign of some level of consciousness. Ms. Vance, can you hear me? I need you to try to swallow. We're going to help you sit up slightly. With Jordan's help, they elevated Lenora's head about 30 degrees. Her eyelids fluttered open, pupils still badly dilated but showing some reactivity to light. Dr. Kwan held the coconut water to her lips. Small sips. Don't choke. This is going to help stabilize your electrolytes. Lenora managed 3 weak swallows before turning her head away. It wasn't much, but it was something. Dr. Feld emptied 2 electrolyte packets into a cup of water and got another few sips into her. The AED arrived and Dr. Reese attached the monitoring pads to Lenora's chest. The small screen flickered to life, displaying a rhythm that made all 3 doctors exchange grim looks. Rapid, irregular, with bizarre QRS complexes that indicated the heart's electrical system was profoundly disturbed. That's consistent with quinine cardiotoxicity, Rowan said softly, looking at the screen from several feet away. The QRS prolongation, the T-wave abnormalities. My mother's research documented this exact pattern. How extensive was your mother's research? Dr. Feld asked, genuine curiosity beneath the urgency. You said 47 cases? 47 documented interactions between Syncona-derived supplements and various prescription medications, Rowan confirmed. But she estimated there were thousands of undocumented cases attributed to other causes because doctors don't routinely ask about supplements, and patients don't think to mention them because they're natural. Her fingers made air quotes around the word, mimicking an expression her mother had used countless times. And pharmaceutical companies don't want to investigate because it would require regulation of an industry that's currently operating with almost no oversight, Jordan added quietly. I read an article about that. Supplements are classified as food, not drugs. They don't require FDA approval. Manufacturers can put almost anything in them as long as they don't make specific medical claims. Exactly, Rowan said, surprised to find an ally. My mother tried to get her research published in major medical journals. They said the sample size was too small. She applied for grants to expand the study. Denied because the supplement lobby has significant political influence. She presented at conferences and was dismissed as fear-mongering. Meanwhile, people kept getting sick from interactions nobody was tracking. Cassandra made a sound of profound disgust. This is neither the time nor the place for conspiracy theories about Big Pharma. We have a medical emergency, not a political platform. It's not a conspiracy if it's documented fact, Jordan said mildly. The supplement industry is worth over $50 billion annually in the US alone. That kind of money buys a lot of resistance to regulation. Enough, Dr. Reese interjected. The political economy of supplements is fascinating, but right now I need to know if this treatment is working. Jennifer, what's her oxygen saturation? Jennifer checked the pulse oximeter. 91%, up from 87. Still low but improving. Heart rate, 140, down from 160. Still tachycardic but trending better. Tremors.
Dr. Feld assessed Lenora's extremities.
Decreasing. Still present but less violent. Pupils are still dilated but showing more consistent light response. Dr. Reese sat back on his heels and exhaled slowly. She's stabilizing. Not out of danger, not even close, but stabilizing. The fluids and electrolytes are helping. He turned to look at Rowan, really look at her, seeing past the oversized hoodie and the fact that she barely came up to his shoulder. You were right. You called this correctly when 3 experienced physicians were about to make a potentially fatal mistake. That's remarkable. Rowan felt something complicated twist in her chest. Relief that Lenora was improving. Vindication that her mother's research had value. Grief that her mother wasn't here to see it validated. And underneath everything, a bone-deep exhaustion from fighting to be heard. My mother was remarkable, she said quietly. I just remembered what she taught me. Cassandra, who had watched this entire exchange with an expression that could have curdled milk, stepped forward with rigid precision. Dr. Reese, while I acknowledge that your patient appears to be improving, I must insist that we address the disciplinary issue at hand. This child, she gestured at Rowan as if indicating a biohazard, directly violated multiple crew instructions, interfered with emergency medical procedures, and demonstrated a complete disregard for aircraft safety protocols. She also saved a woman's life, Dr. Feld pointed out. That remains to be determined, Cassandra countered. Ms. Vance is still in critical condition. We don't know if she'll survive or if there will be lasting damage. What we do know is that this passenger willfully disobeyed lawful crew commands during flight. That's a federal offense. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop several degrees. Several first-class passengers who'd been watching the drama unfold shifted uncomfortably. Jordan Pike's jaw tightened. You're seriously considering pressing charges against a 10-year-old who just prevented a medical catastrophe? His voice was quiet but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. I'm considering enforcing regulations that exist for everyone's safety, Cassandra replied coolly. If we allow passengers to ignore crew instructions whenever they feel they have superior knowledge, we create chaos. Today it's a child with medical information. Tomorrow it's a passenger who thinks they know better than the pilot how to fly the plane. Rules exist for reasons. Rules exist to serve people, Dr. Feld said, standing to face Cassandra directly. Not the other way around. This child demonstrated more medical knowledge and critical thinking than many physicians I've worked with. She saw a pattern, identified the danger, and persisted in trying to communicate it despite being repeatedly dismissed and physically restrained. If anyone should face consequences, it's the system that almost killed a patient by refusing to listen. Rowan watched this argument unfold with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were observing it from a great distance. She'd been here before in different contexts but with the same essential dynamic. Adults arguing about her, around her, rarely with her, debating what she deserved, what she'd earned, what she should be punished or praised for. She didn't care anymore. Lenora Vance was alive and improving. The research her mother had died believing was worthless had just proven its value. That was enough. "I'll go back to my seat," Rowan said, interrupting the escalating argument. "I won't cause any more problems. I'm sorry for not following instructions. Let me ask you this question. How many times have you ignored your kids' or grandkids' suggestions because you thought they were too little or not brilliant enough? How many times have you shut those beautiful, brilliant minds off? If we still have your attention till now, then you've got to subscribe because there's more for Where This Came From and we upload daily." Okay, now let's continue. The apology seemed to catch everyone off guard. Cassandra's mouth opened and closed, searching for a response to compliance she hadn't expected. Dr. Reese frowned. Dr. Feld looked concerned rather than satisfied. "Rowan, you don't need to apologize for being right," Dr. Feld said gently. "But I do need to follow the rules," Rowan replied, exhaustion making her voice flat. "That's how the world works. It doesn't matter if you're right if you don't have the authority to be listened to. My mother learned that. Now I have too." She turned and began walking back toward economy, her notebook clutched against her chest. The pages her mother had filled with warnings nobody wanted to hear. The documentation of dangers that were easier to ignore than address. Rowan made it 3 steps before Jordan Pike spoke up. "Wait." He pulled out his phone, checked something, then looked at Cassandra with the calm certainty of someone who just found the winning move in a complex game. "Before you file any reports or pursue disciplinary action, I think you should know that several passengers recorded this entire interaction, including the part where you physically restrained a minor who was attempting to provide life-saving medical information, including the part where you threatened federal charges against a child for the crime of being correct." Cassandra's face went pale, then flushed an ugly red. "Recording on aircraft is completely legal," Jordan finished. "There's no reasonable expectation of privacy in a public space like an aircraft cabin. And given that we're talking about a potential medical malpractice situation, I'd say documentation is not just legal but prudent. I've already uploaded my footage to cloud storage. I'm guessing I'm not the only one." Around the first-class cabin, several passengers were suddenly very interested in their phones. A woman in 4B gave Jordan a subtle nod. A man in 6A held up his device with the camera still recording. Cassandra looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. "This is highly irregular. So is threatening a child who saved someone's life," Dr. Reese said dryly. "Look, I'm going to need to file a medical incident report anyway. That report is going to state very clearly that the patient presented with quinine toxicity that was correctly identified by a passenger named Rowan Hale, whose intervention prevented administration of contraindicated medication. I'm also going to recommend that Coastal Air update its medical emergency protocols to include consulting all available information sources, regardless of the source's age or credentials. I'll be filing a similar report," Dr. Feld added. "And I'll be noting that crew interference nearly resulted in patient death." Dr. Kwan nodded agreement. "Make that 3 physician statements. This is going to be a case study worth publishing. Cinchona toxicity identified by minor during commercial flight." I can already see the medical journal headlines. Cassandra's expression had progressed from angry to calculating. She was clearly doing risk assessment math in her head. 3 physician reports contradicting her narrative. Multiple passenger videos contradicting her version of events. A patient who'd survived specifically because the disruptive minor had been correct. The liability picture had shifted dramatically, and not in her favor. "I will need to file a report," she said stiffly. "That's protocol. But I will note that the passenger's information, while delivered inappropriately, proved relevant to the medical outcome. It was the closest thing to a concession they were likely to get. The passenger is 10 years old and just saved a woman's life while being physically restrained by an adult in authority," Jordan said quietly. "Maybe your report should focus on what that says about your judgment rather than hers." Before Cassandra could respond, the PA system crackled to life. The captain's voice, calm and professional, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez. We've been informed of a medical emergency in the first-class cabin. I'm pleased to report that the situation has stabilized thanks to the quick action of several passengers and medical professionals on board. However, out of an abundance of caution, we're going to be making an emergency landing in Salt Lake City. Medical personnel will be standing by to transport our passenger to a hospital for further evaluation. We'll be on the ground in approximately 18 minutes. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." The announcement triggered a flurry of activity. Passengers returned to seats. Tray tables went up. Seatbacks moved to upright positions. The ordinary rituals of landing layered over the extraordinary events of the previous half hour. Dr. Reese knelt beside Lenora, who was now conscious enough to track movement with her eyes, though she still looked profoundly ill. "Ms. Vance, can you understand me? We're landing soon. You're going to be taken to a hospital. You've had a serious reaction to a supplement you were taking. Do you understand?" Lenora's lips moved. Her voice was barely a whisper, slurred and weak. "What happened?" "You had a toxic reaction to cinchona bark in one of your supplements. It caused seizures and cardiac instability. You're stable now, but you need hospital care." He paused, then added, "A young passenger identified the interaction and helped us treat you correctly. She saved your life." Lenora's eyes moved slowly, searching the cabin. They found Rowan, who'd stopped halfway down the aisle and was watching the medical team with quiet intensity. Their gazes met across the distance of class sections and age and experience and wealth. The woman who had everything, the child who had nothing but knowledge. "Thank you," Lenora mouthed, though no sound emerged. Rowan nodded once, then continued to her seat. The landing in Salt Lake City was smooth despite the emergency circumstances. Paramedics boarded the moment the aircraft reached the gate, moving with efficient urgency. They transferred Lenora to a stretcher, still connected to the 4 that Dr. Feld had started, still wearing the AED monitoring pads that tracked her slowly stabilizing heart rhythm. Dr. Reese briefed the paramedic team lead, a composed woman in her 40s who listened with the focused attention of someone accustomed to receiving critical information in compressed timeframes. "Patient is Lenora Vance, 62. Experienced acute cinchona alkaloid toxicity from supplements. Presented with seizures, altered mental status, and dangerous cardiac arrhythmias. We've administered 4 fluids with oral electrolyte supplementation. No benzodiazepines." We were about to administer midazolam when a passenger identified the interaction. "She needs continued cardiac monitoring, electrolyte panel, possible activated charcoal if she's within the window for GI decontamination, and toxicology consultation." The paramedic made notes on her tablet, then looked up with sharp interest. "A passenger identified cinchona toxicity? Is that passenger a physician?" "No," Dr. Reese said, a strange smile crossing his face. "She's 10 years old. Her mother was a pharmacology researcher who specialized in supplement drug interactions. The kid learned well. Is she still on board? We should get a statement." Row 29B.
Rowan Hale.
"And yes, you should definitely get her statement. She probably knows more about this specific toxicity than most emergency physicians." The paramedics wheeled Lenora away, her assistants trailing behind with luggage and shocked expressions. The remaining passengers were informed they'd be delayed approximately 90 minutes while the aircraft was cleaned and inspected, and while statements were taken from key witnesses, 2 airport police officers and a representative from the FAA boarded to conduct interviews. They spoke first with Cassandra, whose account was carefully neutral, emphasizing procedures and protocols while notably avoiding any mention of threats or restraint. Then with the 3 physicians, whose accounts were consistent and remarkably critical of initial crew response. Then with several passengers who eagerly shared their video footage. Finally, they reached Rowan. She sat in her middle seat, notebook open, staring at a page without really seeing it. The officer who approached was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself as Officer Chin.
Rowan Hale?
I need to ask you some questions about what happened during the medical emergency. Is that okay? Rowan nodded. Can you tell me in your own words what you observed and what actions you took? Rowan recounted the events with the same clinical precision she'd used when explaining the toxicity to the doctors. She didn't embellish, didn't emphasize Cassandra's hostility or her own frustration, just stated facts in chronological order, the way her mother had taught her to document case studies. Officer Chun took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Rowan finished, the officer sat back and studied her with an expression that mixed respect and concern. "You did something very brave today," she said quietly. "Most adults wouldn't have persisted the way you did when faced with that level of resistance from authority figures. My mother used to say that being right doesn't matter if you can't make people listen," Rowan replied. "But she also said that sometimes you have to try anyway, because the alternative is watching someone suffer when you could have helped." Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Rowan's throat tightened. She couldn't make anyone listen either. She died 4 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they diagnosed it, it was too late. She spent her last weeks trying to get her research published so it wouldn't die with her. Nobody would accept it. Officer Chen's expression softened. "I'm very sorry for your loss, but I think she'd be proud of you today. You did exactly what she would have wanted. You used knowledge to help someone, and you didn't give up even when it was hard." Rowan managed a small nod, not trusting her voice. The officer finished her notes and stood. "I don't think there will be any further issues regarding your actions on this flight. The medical professionals are calling you a hero. The passenger videos support your version of events completely. If anything, there may be questions about crew response, but that's not your concern." After Officer Chin left, Rowan sat alone in her row while around her, the cabin slowly emptied as passengers disembarked to stretch their legs during the delay. She should probably get up, use the restroom, get some water. But moving required energy she didn't have. She'd done it. She'd saved someone using her mother's research. She'd proven the work had value, that the warnings were real, that the dangers her mother had documented weren't exaggerated or fear-mongering or the paranoid fantasies of an attention-seeking researcher. So why did she feel so hollow? Because her mother wasn't here to see it. Because proving the research was valid didn't undo the years of rejection, didn't restore the grants that were denied, didn't publish the papers that were dismissed. Because one woman's life saved didn't balance against thousands who'd suffered undiagnosed interactions because the medical establishment and supplement industry had conspired through indifference and profit motive to ignore the problem. Because Rowan was 10 years old and alone and flying to live with an aunt who was kind but distant, in a city she barely knew, to start over in a life that would never include her mother's voice explaining chemical structures at the kitchen table or her mother's laugh when an experiment yielded unexpected results, or her mother's fierce determination that knowledge mattered, that truth mattered, that fighting for what was right mattered even when you lost. "Mind if I sit?" Rowan looked up to find Jordan Pike standing in the aisle, holding 2 bottles of orange juice. He gestured to the empty window seat. "It's not my seat," Rowan said. "I don't think anyone's going to complain." He settled into the seat and offered her one of the bottles. "You look like you could use some sugar. And probably some electrolytes too, after all that adrenaline." Rowan accepted the juice because refusing felt like more effort than accepting. She opened it and took a small sip, the sweetness sharp on her tongue. "That was impressive," Jordan said after a moment. "What you did up there. The way you held your ground even when everyone was telling you to back down. That takes courage." "It takes stubbornness," Rowan corrected. "Courage is when you're not scared. I was terrified. Courage is doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Especially when you're terrified." Jordan took a drink from his own juice, seemingly content to sit in comfortable silence. He had the demeanor of someone who understood that sometimes people needed presence more than conversation. After a minute, Rowan spoke quietly. "My mother used to tell me that science was about being wrong until you weren't. That every experiment that failed was just information. That rejection meant you were asking questions people weren't ready to answer yet. She said the trick was to keep asking anyway." Sounds like she was teaching you resilience disguised as methodology. Maybe. Rowan traced the chemical formula her mother had written on the notebook's cover. Cinchona bark alkaloid structure, rendered in precise pen strokes. She was sick for 8 months before she died. Near the end, she was in so much pain that she couldn't work anymore, couldn't write, could barely stay awake for more than an hour at a time. But she made me promise I'd keep the research safe. Said that someday someone would listen. Someone would care enough to investigate. She was right, Jordan said gently. Today someone listened. 3 someones. And because of that, a woman who would have died is going to live. 1 woman. Rowan's voice was hollow. In 6 years, my mother documented 47 cases of serious supplement interactions. 47 people who got sick or died from combinations their doctors never thought to investigate. And those were just the ones she could verify. She estimated the real number was in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands. All because supplements are marketed as safe and natural and harmless, and doctors don't ask about them, and companies aren't required to test for interactions. Jordan was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this. That's a system-level failure. That's not something one person can fix, even a brilliant one, even a determined one. I know. Rowan felt tears threatening again and blinked them back angrily. That's what makes it so frustrating. My mother was right. Her research was solid. The science was good. But the system didn't care because fixing it would cost money and require regulations that powerful industries don't want. So her work got rejected and dismissed and ignored, and she died knowing that people would keep getting hurt from something completely preventable. But now you have proof, Jordan pointed out. What happened today with witnesses and documentation and physician statements, that's evidence. That's validation. That could open doors your mother couldn't open. Rowan looked at him skeptically. You really think one emergency on one flight is going to change a $50 billion industry? No, Jordan admitted. But I think it's a data point. And in my work, I've learned that one data point can start a pattern. And a pattern can change how people see a problem. And changing perception is the first step toward changing systems. He pulled out his phone and opened his cloud storage. I've got video of the entire incident. The medical emergency, your intervention, the crew resistance, the doctors confirming you were right. That's documentation. Dr. Reese said he's writing a case report. That's peer-reviewed validation. Multiple passengers recorded the event. That's witnesses. So what? Rowan asked tiredly. What am I supposed to do with that? I don't know yet, Jordan said honestly. But I know someone who might. My sister works in medical journalism. She writes for publications that actually investigate systemic healthcare issues. Stories about pharmaceutical pricing, medical device failures, regulatory capture. The kind of journalism that occasionally gets regulations changed and policies revised. Would you be willing to talk to her? Rowan considered this. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect herself from more rejection, more dismissal, more adults who'd pat her head and tell her it was complicated and she was too young to understand. But another part, the part that sounded like her mother's voice, whispered that giving up meant all those other 47 cases stayed invisible. meant the thousands of undiagnosed interactions stayed hidden, meant her mother's work died for nothing. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll talk to her." Jordan smiled and made a note in his phone. "Good. I'll set something up once we get to Seattle. Or Tacoma, I guess, for you. Tacoma. I'm staying with my aunt. Is she expecting you? Should someone let her know about the delay?" Rowan pulled out a battered cell phone and checked messages. "She knows. The airline contacted her. She's nice. I don't really know her that well. She's my mom's younger sister, but they weren't close. She offered to take me after, because there wasn't anyone else." The loneliness in that statement was profound. Jordan felt it settle in his chest like a physical weight. "Family's complicated," he offered, knowing it was inadequate. "But maybe this is a chance to build something new. She took you in. That's not nothing." "I know." Rowan finished her juice and set the empty bottle on the tray table.
I'm grateful.
"I am. It's just hard. Everything's hard right now." "Yeah," Jordan agreed. "I imagine it is." They sat in silence for a while, watching passengers slowly filter back onto the aircraft. The cabin crew was preparing for departure, running through checklists with practiced efficiency. Cassandra was conspicuously absent, replaced by a different senior flight attendant who had a warmer demeanor and who smiled at passengers rather than evaluating them for compliance violations. When boarding was nearly complete, Dr. Feld appeared at Rowan's row. She'd changed into casual clothes from her carry-on, looking more approachable in jeans and a sweater than she had in her previous professional attire. "Rowan, do you have a minute?" Rowan nodded, and Jordan excused himself to return to his own seat, but not before getting Rowan's aunt's contact information to arrange that conversation with his sister. Dr. Feld slid into the vacated window seat. "I wanted to talk to you before we land. About what happened. About your mother's research." Rowan braced herself for another well-meaning but ultimately useless expression of sympathy. "I'm a hospitalist," Dr. Feld continued. "I work at a teaching hospital in Seattle. Part of my job is identifying gaps in medical education and developing training programs to address them. What happened today revealed a significant gap. Most physicians, myself included, don't routinely ask patients about supplements. We ask about prescription medications, allergies, sometimes over-the-counter drugs. But supplements exist in this weird regulatory blind spot where they're not quite food and not quite medicine, so they fall through the cracks of standard medical history taking." Rowan felt a flicker of interest despite her exhaustion. "My mother tried to get medical schools to include supplement drug interactions in pharmacology curricula. She was told it wasn't a priority." "Well, it should be a priority," Dr. Feld said firmly. "And after today, I'm going to make it one. I want to develop a training module on supplement interactions for our residents. I want to create protocols for emergency departments to screen for supplements as thoroughly as they screen for prescription drugs. And I want to base that training on solid research." She paused. "Would you be willing to share your mother's work with me?" Rowan's grip tightened on the notebook. "Why should I believe you'll actually use it? My mother shared her research with dozens of people who said they were interested. None of them did anything with it. Because I almost killed someone today by not knowing what you knew," Dr. Feld said bluntly. "Because I'm a physician who prides herself on thorough differential diagnosis, and I completely missed a life-threatening drug interaction that a 10-year-old caught immediately. Because that's humbling and infuriating, and it makes me want to ensure I never make that mistake again, and that my colleagues don't either." The honesty was startling. Most adults, in Rowan's experience, hated admitting they were wrong, especially to children. "My mother's research isn't published," Rowan said slowly. "It's mostly in this notebook. Case studies, interaction mechanisms, clinical observations. It's solid science, but it was never formally peer-reviewed because no journal would accept it." "Then we'll get it peer-reviewed," Dr. Feld said. "I have colleagues in clinical pharmacology who'd be interested in this." We can structure it as a case series, use what happened today as the index case. Cinchona-benzodiazepine interaction identified during commercial flight. A review of unreported supplement toxicities. That would get attention. Rowan wanted to hope, but hope had disappointed her too many times. And if the journals still reject it, then we present it at conferences. We publish it in open-access journals that pharmaceutical companies can't pressure. We get it into the hands of emergency medicine physicians who actually treat these cases. We bypass the traditional gatekeepers. Dr. Feld's expression was determined. Your mother was trying to work within a broken system. Maybe it's time to work around it instead. For the first time since her mother's death, Rowan felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly. Hope was too fragile, too easily crushed. But possibility. The faint outline of a path forward that didn't end in her mother's work gathering dust in a storage unit while people continued suffering from preventable interactions. Okay, Rowan said quietly. I'll share the research, but I have conditions. Dr. Feld raised an eyebrow, surprised but not dismissive.
I'm listening.
First, my mother's name has to be on any publication.
Doktor Elise Hale.
She did the work. She deserves the credit, even if she's not here to see it. Absolutely. That's non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned. Second, any money generated from this research, consulting fees or speaking honorariums or whatever, goes into a fund for uninsured patients who've experienced supplement-related adverse events. My mother would have wanted that.
Dr. Feld smilet.
That's remarkably thoughtful. And yes, I agree to that as well. Third, Rowan's voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. If you get tired of this, or if it becomes too complicated, or if people push back and it gets difficult, you have to tell me. You can't just quietly let it die. I need to know so I can find someone else who'll keep fighting. The condition revealed more about Rowan's experience with broken promises than any complaint could have. Dr. Feld felt something tighten in her throat. Rowan, I promise you that if I can't continue this work for any reason, I will personally ensure it gets into the hands of someone who will. You have my word. But I don't think that's going to happen. What I saw today lit a fire under me that's not going out anytime soon. Rowan studied her face, looking for the tells that adults displayed when they were saying what they thought she wanted to hear rather than what they meant. She found none. Dr. Feld's expression was open, earnest, and determined. Okay, Rowan said again. Then we have a deal. They exchanged contact information, Dr. Feld programming Rowan's aunt's address and phone number into her device. Before she left, she squeezed Rowan's shoulder gently. Your mother raised a remarkable daughter. I'm sorry I won't get to meet her, but I'm honored to help continue her work. After Dr. Feld returned to her seat, Rowan sat alone again, but the isolation felt different now. Less like abandonment and more like the quiet before something began. She opened the notebook and paged through her mother's handwriting, seeing it not as a memorial to failure, but as a foundation for future work. The PA system crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rodriguez again. We've been cleared for departure. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for pushback. The aircraft came to life around her. Engines humming, passengers settling. The ordinary machinery of air travel resuming after extraordinary interruption. Rowan buckled her seatbelt and watched through the window as Salt Lake City fell away beneath them, mountains rising in the distance like promises. The remainder of the flight to Seattle was uneventful. Rowan dozed intermittently, exhaustion finally catching up with adrenaline. When she woke, a flight attendant she didn't recognize was placing a first-class meal tray on her table, complete with real silverware and a cloth napkin. Compliments of the captain, the attendant said with a warm smile. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Rowan stared at the tray, overwhelmed by the gesture. It was probably just airline public relations, managing the optics of the day's events. But it felt like something more, like acknowledgement, like being seen. She ate slowly, savoring food that was vastly superior to the standard economy offering. By the time she finished, they were beginning their descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The landing was smooth, the late afternoon sun painting Puget Sound in shades of silver and blue. As the aircraft taxied to the gate, the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Seattle. Before we begin deplaning, I want to take a moment to acknowledge some extraordinary passengers who handled a medical emergency with remarkable skill and composure. To our medical professionals who provided care under difficult circumstances, thank you. And to the young passenger whose knowledge and courage saved a life today, the entire crew of Coastal Air Flight 918 salutes you. We are grateful to have had you aboard." The cabin erupted in applause. Rowan felt her face flush hot as heads turned toward her, passengers clapping and smiling and nodding approval. She wanted to sink into her seat and disappear, but she also felt something warm spreading through her chest. Not pride exactly, more like validation. Proof that she'd existed, that she'd mattered, that her actions had consequences beyond herself. The applause continued until she thought she might combust from embarrassment. Finally, mercifully, it faded and passengers began gathering belongings and preparing to deplane. Rowan shouldered her backpack and joined the slow procession toward the exit. As she passed through first class, she noticed that seat 3A was empty, its leather cushions showing faint stains from the medical emergency. The space where Lenora Vance had nearly died and been saved by knowledge that almost no one had been willing to hear. At the aircraft door, the new senior flight attendant stopped her. "Rowan, the captain would like to meet you if you have a moment." Rowan nodded, nerves fluttering in her stomach. She was led to the cockpit where Captain Rodriguez, a man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, stood waiting. "Miss Hale," he said, extending his hand formally. "It's an honor to meet you. What you did today was extraordinary. You saved a passenger's life through knowledge, courage, and persistence. That's the definition of heroism in my book." Rowan shook his hand, her small fingers disappearing into his grip. "I just remembered what my mother taught me." "Then your mother was an exceptional teacher." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pair of wings, the kind airlines give to children visiting the cockpit. "These are junior pilot wings. Normally we give them to kids who come up to see the flight deck. But I think you've earned something more." He unpinned his own captain's wings from his uniform shirt and held them out to her. "These are the real thing. I've worn them for 23 years. I'd be honored if you'd accept them." Rowan stared at the wings, gleaming silver against his palm. "I can't take those. They're yours." "They're mine to give," Captain Rodriguez said gently. "And I want you to have them as a reminder that authority isn't about age or position or credentials. Real authority comes from knowledge, integrity, and the courage to speak truth even when it's difficult. You demonstrated all three today. You're more qualified to wear these than some pilots I've known." Rowan accepted the wings with trembling hands. They were heavier than she'd expected, solid and real and weighted with meaning she didn't fully understand yet, but knew was important. "Thank you," she whispered. "No, Miss Hale. Thank you. Here's my final question to you that is watching. When next a little boy or girl walks up to you with an idea, would you still shut them off or give them listening ears? Like if you believe our kids are really the future. Subscribe so you won't miss our next upload." She emerged from the jetway into the terminal, wings clutched in one hand and backpack hanging from the other shoulder. The arrival gate was crowded with the usual chaos of reunions and rushed connections. She scanned the faces, looking for her Aunt Patricia, whom she'd only met twice before, at her mother's funeral and once years earlier at a family gathering she barely remembered. Rowan, a woman in her late 40s, pushed through the crowd, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a University of Washington sweatshirt. Patricia Hale looked like a younger, softer version of Rowan's mother, with the same determined jaw and intelligent eyes but less of the fierce intensity that had defined Elise. Patricia wrapped Rowan in a hug that was tight enough to convey genuine emotion but not so overwhelming as to be suffocating. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I am so glad you're safe. When the airline called about the emergency landing, I nearly lost my mind. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Rowan assured her. "I wasn't the one who was sick." I know. They told me you helped save someone's life. A woman who had some kind of poisoning." Patricia shook her head in amazement. "Rowan, that's incredible. And terrifying. And I have about 1,000,000 questions, but they can wait until we get home. Are you hungry? Tired? Do you need anything?" The barrage of questions was so different from her mother's measured, scientific approach to problem-solving that Rowan felt momentarily disoriented. But there was warmth in Patricia's concern, genuine care beneath the scattered energy.
I'm okay.
"Just tired. Then let's get you home." Patricia grabbed Rowan's backpack despite her protests and guided her toward baggage claim. "I set up the spare room for you. It's not much, but I got you some new bedding and cleared out space for your things. We can decorate however you want. Paint the walls, get posters, whatever makes it feel like yours." They collected Rowan's single battered suitcase from the carousel and headed toward the parking garage. Patricia kept up a steady stream of conversation, filling the silence with information about the neighborhood, the school Rowan would be attending, the library nearby, the park with trails. It was overwhelming but not unpleasant, like being wrapped in a blanket of normalcy after the intensity of the flight. The drive to Tacoma took 45 minutes through rush-hour traffic. Patricia's house was a small craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood with mature trees and well-maintained yards. Modest but comfortable. Nothing like the cramped Miami apartment Rowan had shared with her mother, where medical texts had occupied more space than furniture and the kitchen table had doubled as a laboratory. Patricia showed her to the spare room, which was indeed small but painted a soft blue and furnished with a bed, dresser, and desk. "I know this is all really strange and probably scary," Patricia said quietly. "New place, new person, everything different. I can't replace your mom. I'm not going to try, but I want you to know that you're not a burden or an obligation. You're family. You're welcome here. This is your home now, for as long as you need it." Rowan felt tears threatening for what felt like the 100th time that day. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me." Patricia hesitated, then added, "Your mom and I weren't close. That's my fault more than hers. I thought she was too intense, too obsessed with her work. I didn't understand why she couldn't just let things go and be happy. But after she died and I read some of her research, I realized she was trying to help people. She was fighting for something important. I wish I'd understood that when she was alive. I wish I'd been a better sister." "She was intense," Rowan agreed quietly. "But she was also right. About the supplements, about the interactions, about all of it. Today proved it." Patricia smiled sadly. "She'd be so proud of you, using her research to save someone. That's exactly what she would have wanted." That night, after unpacking her meager belongings and eating dinner and enduring more kind questions from Patricia, Rowan lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. The captain's wings sat on the nightstand beside her, catching moonlight from the window. Her mother's notebook rested on the desk, full of knowledge that finally had a path toward being heard. It wasn't the life she'd wanted. It wasn't the life she'd expected. But it was the life she had now. And maybe, just maybe, it was a life where her mother's work would matter, where knowledge would be listened to, where the fights her mother had lost could eventually be won. 3 days later, Rowan received a call from Dr. Feld. Lenora Vance had been discharged from the hospital, fully recovered except for some residual tremor that was expected to resolve completely. She'd undergone comprehensive toxicology screening that confirmed cinchona alkaloid poisoning exactly as Rowan had diagnosed. The hospital had contacted the supplement manufacturer, triggering an FDA investigation into their formulation and labeling practices. "There's more," Dr. Feld said. excitement evident in her voice. "Lenora wants to meet you, and she has a proposal I think you'll want to hear." 2 weeks after that, Rowan sat in a conference room at Vancewell Therapeutics headquarters in Seattle, facing the woman whose life she'd saved. Lenora looked elegant and healthy, her color fully restored, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Patricia's monthly mortgage payment. But her eyes, when they met Rowan's, held genuine warmth. "Miss Hale," Lenora said formally, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "You're welcome." Rowan still wasn't comfortable with titles and formal address, but she was learning to navigate them. "I've had some time to reflect on what happened on that flight," Lenora continued, "on how close I came to dying because I trusted natural supplements over actual pharmaceutical science, on how 3 experienced physicians almost administered treatment that would have killed me, on how a 10-year-old girl knew more about drug interactions than my entire medical team." She paused. "That's unacceptable. The system that allows that to happen is broken, and I'm in a position to help fix it." She slid a folder across the table. Rowan opened it to find what appeared to be legal documents, dense with language she didn't fully understand. "I'm establishing a research foundation dedicated to investigating supplement drug interactions," Lenora explained. "Initial funding of $5 million, with commitments to continue funding based on research outcomes. The foundation will be named the Dr. Elise Hale Center for Pharmaceutical Safety. Your mother's research will form the foundation of our initial studies. Dr. Feld has agreed to serve as medical director, and I'd like you to serve on our advisory board." Rowan stared at the documents, unable to process what she was reading. "Advisory board?
I'm 10. Kropka.
You're 10 and you saved my life with knowledge that medical professionals didn't have," Lenora corrected. "Age doesn't determine wisdom. Experience and dedication do. Your mother spent 6 years documenting interactions that could save thousands of lives. You ensured that knowledge wasn't lost. That deserves recognition. That deserves a platform. I don't know anything about running a foundation or being on boards. None of us do at first. We learn." Lenora's expression softened slightly. "Miss Hale, Rowan, I'm not asking you to make decisions about things you don't understand. I'm asking you to be the voice of your mother's research, to help guide our priorities, to ensure we stay focused on the mission that mattered to her. Can you do that?" Rowan thought about her mother, working late into the night, documenting case after case that nobody wanted to investigate. She thought about the 47 people who'd suffered because the system failed them. She thought about all the future patients who might be saved if someone finally listened. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." 6 months later, the Dr. Elise Hale Center for Pharmaceutical Safety published its first study in the Journal of Emergency Medicine. Cinchona alkaloid toxicity masquerading as stroke, a case report and review of unreported supplement interactions, became one of the journal's most downloaded articles. Medical schools began incorporating supplement screening into their curricula. Emergency departments updated their protocols. The FDA launched investigations into several major supplement manufacturers. And Rowan Hale, 12 years old now and settling into life in Tacoma with Aunt Patricia, continued her mother's work. Not because she had to, not because anyone expected it, but because knowledge mattered, truth mattered, and sometimes, if you were brave enough and stubborn enough and refused to give up even when everyone told you to sit down and be quiet, you could change the world. She still had Captain Rodriguez's wings, still carried her mother's notebook, still remembered what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored and told she was wrong when she knew she was right. But she also remembered what happened when she didn't give up, when she trusted knowledge over authority, when she spoke truth even when it was hard. Sometimes the people who change the world are the ones nobody expects. The ones who are too young, too inexperienced, too outside the system to know they're supposed to accept how things are instead of fighting for how things should be. Rowan Hale learned that lesson at 38,000 feet, surrounded by people who thought they knew better. She'd carry it with her for the rest of her life. And because she did, countless patients would survive interactions that would have killed them. Countless families would avoid the grief that had shaped Rowan's childhood. Countless researchers would find their work valued instead of dismissed. All because one child refused to sit down and be quiet when a life was at stake. All because knowledge, in the end, proved more powerful than authority. All because sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that needs to be heard the most.